Communist Concorde, the undisputed champion of wasting money in aviation history, built with the singular purpose of propaganda. And who can forget its charming nickname in the West, the Concordski? The Soviet Tupolev Tu-144 was never meant to be a passenger jet like the Concorde. Impossible. This aircraft was intended to be the first supersonic airliner to fly. The Soviets secured the right to boast. Leaving that aside, the first Tu-144 was so bad that the second version was essentially a completely different aircraft. Despite being over half a century old, this aircraft looks like it came from the future. It resembles a giant bird landing, with its nose dipping to give the pilot a view of the ground. The Tu-144 was basically the last passenger plane that thought a parachute was a great safety feature, and the only one with ejection seats. So, why couldn't the Soviets pull off a supersonic passenger plane? Why wasn't the Tu-144 just a copy of the Concorde? And how did those cute little Canards play a role in causing a crash at the Paris Air Show? So many questions to answer in this video. The Tu-144 project officially began in 1963 under the Tupolev Bureau. At the time, Tupolev had experience building military supersonic bombers, but designing a supersonic passenger aircraft was a much greater challenge. Reliability, safety, and comfort had to be at a much higher level. Military aircraft fly supersonic only for short periods, mainly to cross enemy territory. Supersonic passenger jets, however, must maintain supersonic speeds for extended periods. This required high efficiency, which is why tailless aircraft were designed without vertical stabilizers. At lower speeds, controlling the aircraft became difficult due to the lack of stabilizers. To train pilots for this challenge, the Soviets modified a MiG-21 with the same wing design as the Tu-144, but without stabilizers, allowing them to practice handling a tailless aircraft. The tailless design of the Tu-144 made it closely resemble the Concorde and caused controversy. Westerners believed that the Soviets were technologically inferior and could only design a supersonic aircraft by stealing the Concorde's designs. But that is greatly exaggerated. Yes, the KGB spied on the Concorde program because, guess what? That's what spies do. Nevertheless, the Soviets solved several problems independently, especially in the aircraft interior. The Soviets had less sophisticated solutions for the aircraft interior compared to the Concorde engineers. While both aircraft looked similar on the outside, there were still many differences. The Tu-144 was slightly larger and wider, allowing for more passengers. The engines of the Tu-144 were stacked, unlike the Concorde, which had two separate compartments. Later, Tu-144 versions had Canards. Another big difference was the landing gear. The Tu-144 had 12 wheels in 3 rows, compared to only 4 wheels on the Concorde. This was because the Concorde was designed for flights between major global airports such as New York and London, while the Tu-144 was intended for Soviet airports, which were often rougher. The Soviets subjected the landing gear to a series of tests, especially on wet runways, to ensure it was robust enough and that the engines could handle water ingestion. In the event of a landing gear failure, the Soviets practiced several evacuation scenarios. The first Tu-144 was even equipped with ejection seats in case something went wrong. You can see the open hatches from which the pilots would exit in an emergency. The Tu-144 was faster, reaching Mach 2.29 compared to the Concorde at Mach 2.04, and flew higher at 65,000 feet compared to the Concorde's 59,000 feet. The Tu-144 first flew on December 31st, 1968, 2 months before the Concorde. Soviet propaganda celebrated the 38-minute first flight as a great triumph, but engineers already knew about the aircraft's subpar performance. The Tu-144 broke the sound barrier for the first time on June 5, 1969, 4 months before the Concorde. However, The Concorde was not the first commercial jet aircraft to break the sound barrier. In fact, that title belongs to an American Douglas DC-8. On August 21, 1961, during a test flight to evaluate a new leading-edge wing design, a DC-8 broke the sound barrier at Mach 1.012 in a controlled dive through 41,000 feet and maintained supersonic speed for 16 seconds. And that's exactly how the DC-8 made history. A major problem with the first Tu-144 frame was that packing all 4 engines together caused severe vibrations. This made landings and takeoffs tricky. The wings did not generate enough lift, and the aircraft weighed 20 tons more than planned. The engines were also extremely inefficient, but more on that later. The combination of all these problems prevented the plane from reaching its original destination of Khabarovsk, 4,000 miles away. The practical range of the first Tu-144 was just under 1,800 miles. Meanwhile, the Concorde had more than twice the range at 4,500 miles. Tupolev had to design a new frame. The Tu-144 was essentially a completely new frame and made its first flight in 1971. It had larger, redesigned wings. The engines were moved into 2 separate compartments to reduce vibrations. The new, smaller landing gear with 8 wheels was housed in the engine compartments. The aircraft became larger and wider to carry 150 passengers. The revised Tu-144 was better than the prototype, but weighed 15 tons more and retained the inefficient engines. Its range was only about 2,200 miles instead of the planned 4,000 miles. The Soviets added Canards to the Tu-144S, which the Concorde did not have. The Canards would only retract during takeoff and landing to increase lift at the front of the aircraft. Canards gave the Tu-144 an aerodynamic advantage over the Concorde in terms of lift and stability at low speed. However, there were also disadvantages. The Canards increased the complexity of the aircraft. They also added more weight. In fact, the production model of the Tu-144 weighed 97 tons, which was 33 tons more than planned in the original design. Speaking of Canards, they probably caused the Tu-144 crash during the 1973 Paris Air Show. You know, the Soviet Canards were considered quite advanced at the time, so the French decided to fly a Mirage aircraft to spy on the Concordski from above and take photos of the Canards in flight. Unaware of this, when the Mirage suddenly emerged from the cloud, it is believed that the pilots took drastic measures to avoid a collision, so they crashed the Concordski by force. This overloaded the aircraft, and it broke apart in flight. Although officials never fully revealed what caused the crash, it appears that both the French and the Soviets covered up the investigation to avoid embarrassment. Passenger flights with the Tu-144S began on November 1st, 1977, operating weekly over a 2,000-mile route from Moscow to Almaty, Kazakhstan. The number of passengers was limited to 80, although the capacity was 150, and the cruising speed just exceeded Mach 2. This route was the only one served by the Tu-144. Due to range limitations or problems with sonic booms, it was not possible to fly to the other 18 Soviet airports that could accommodate the Tu-144. The Soviets portrayed flying the Tu-144 as a luxurious experience with cognac and caviar for the passengers. The propaganda claimed that everyone felt like an astronaut, which was true because of the noise. You see, traveling at a cruising speed of Mach 2, the cabin became incredibly loud. This was partly due to engine noise and partly to the air conditioning systems. At Mach 2, the aircraft fuselage would heat up to 250 degrees Fahrenheit. Without cool air in the cabin, the passengers would have been boiled alive. The noise in the cabin was 90 to 95 decibels, as loud as a lawnmower. Passengers sitting next to each other could communicate by shouting, while passengers sitting 2 seats apart could only communicate by taking notes. The rear of the plane was even louder, and one of the reasons why the number of passengers was limited to 80. Flying on the Tu-144 was relatively cheap, not because of the cabin noise. The tickets were subsidized by the Soviet government. At that time, Concorde tickets cost about $975, while Tu-144 tickets cost about 68 rubles, which was about $100. The ticket revenue didn't even cover the plane's fuel costs. It was all just a show, but it didn't last long. On June 1st, 1978, Aeroflot withdrew the Tu-144S after only 7 months of passenger service for 2 reasons. The first reason was an accident that had occurred a week earlier during a test flight of a new Tu-144D. A fire broke out during the flight, resulting in an emergency landing and the death of 2 crew members. The second reason was the extreme unreliability of the Concordski. Aeroflot operated a total of 102 scheduled flights, during which there were 226 malfunctions, 80 of which were serious enough to cancel or delay the flight. During the 7 months in service, 55 passenger flights took place, carrying only 3,284 passengers. The Concorde never achieved what the Concorde did, carrying over 3 million passengers in 27 years. The only reason the Soviets flew passengers in the Tu-144 was to show that they could do it politically.